Hello and welcome to another update. In this one I'll be covering the latest developments throughout the front line. Starting out in the direction of Kherson, the Ukrainian forces have managed to slightly advance within the Dacia area by the Antonovsky Bridge. So the Antonovsky Bridge has two parts. The first part is across the Dnieper River, where there's the large river area, and the Ukrainian forces have managed to cross that into the islands in the middle that is separated from the Kherson mainland by the Kunka River and other rivers in between. So the Ukrainian forces here have a foothold by Dacia and have established some positions by these middle islands, but have not managed to cross over to the eastern Kherson mainland. So in this direction we see that they have managed to advance further, and there is fighting ongoing in this direction, mainly Ukrainian forces trying to advance and Russian artillery and airstrikes on those positions. We then move on to the Robotine direction, where we here see that the Ukrainian forces continue their attacks in all three directions. However, they have not seen any advancements over the last 24 hours, as they have managed to push on the Russian positions, but the Russians are able to hold them back and push them back. We saw the video last time with the Ukrainian forces being attacked by an infantry fighting vehicle in the direction of the trenches here through west of Verbove. And in this one, we see a Russian FAB 500 striking Ukrainian positions right to the south of Robotine. And in this direction, the Ukrainian forces are fighting over the trenches, which we can see lined out here in the video, where we see that there is some night vision drone perspective overseeing the trenches. And we can hardly see any infantry, but there is a vehicle driving by, and that vehicle is the one that is targeted by the FAB 500. There are some indication of troops by the trenches themselves, but there is no clear picture from this footage here. So the fighting in this direction continues to be in the initiative of the Ukrainian forces. The Russian forces are trying to hold them back by defending their positions and holding on to their fortifications, but the Ukrainian forces are launching these small platoon-sized assaults. So the logic behind these are that the Ukrainian forces use about 5 units to attack a Russian position. To repel that attack, the Russian forces either use direct fire from the trenches or launch their own airstrikes / artillery strikes on those positions. Then the Ukrainian forces use their drones to reconnaissance sweep across the back line around in the direction of the artillery fire. If they detect the Russian artillery, then they bombard it and counter battery strike. And this brings us to this article here. This article, written by Forbes, talks about how artillery duels are essentially a thing of the past, as Ukrainian and Russian gunners hunt each other at long range. So this article essentially says that the whole concept of counter battery strikes, where Russian and Ukrainian artillery shoots at each other from long range and in a duel to see whoever destroys their opponent first, is essentially a thing of the past. It doesn't happen anymore. And the reason for that is the introduction of the heavy use of drones. So with the Russian forces and the Ukrainian forces using drones all over the areas, let's say the Ukrainians are using drones in this area and the Russians in this area, then we have 1, 2, 3, 4 artillery pieces on the Ukrainian side and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the Russian side. Then whichever drone detects the artillery first, then the Ukrainian side, in case they detect the Russian artillery, would use accurate artillery strikes to destroy that artillery position unit. So essentially, whichever side detects the other first is the one that succeeds. While in olden times it would be whoever had the most firepower, whoever had the most precision, and so on. But now it's just whoever detects the other one first, and as such we see that the concept of artillery duels have significantly changed. And this is why it could pay off to send smaller units, because if the Russians have to reveal their positions every time they have to destroy a small platoon, then they would lose a lot more artillery than only revealing their positions whenever the Ukrainian forces launch large assault units with tens of dozens of tanks and armored vehicles, and then the Russian forces just destroy that whole thing and then the Ukrainian forces in turn destroy 4 or 5 artillery pieces. Now they can destroy 1 or 2 artillery pieces for a platoon sized. That is a much better trade. Now, if we take a look at what types of artillery is being used across the front, we know that there are 3 types being used by the Russian and Ukrainian forces. There's the standard one, which are just smaller mortar systems, which usually have about 2 kilometers of range. So a very small one, like the distance between Novopokupivka and the trenches here by the front. Then we have the second one, which is the standard artillery use, which is about 15 kilometers. So they can shoot at the front all the way from the Ocherutavate defensive positions. And then there's the third one, which is about 30 to 50 kilometers of range, which could be shot all the way back from the fields south of Tokmak. But if they are located at Tokmak, which they most likely are, then the range would be somewhere around all the way up to Orehiv, somewhere around this direction. So the artillery is most likely located at these 2 directions at a distance of 37 kilometers from each other. Of course, located elsewhere in the areas around the locations, as well as around Orehiv. But generally, these are the locations of the long-range artillery. Then we have some shorter range, which would be closer to the front, like behind the first main line of defense of the Russian forces and around Novodenlivka. These are also areas for the medium-range artillery. And then we have the short range right by the front line, located by Robotine and Novopokupivka, which are smaller mortar units. The Ukrainian forces are not using these as they do not have any clear positions in these areas, maybe behind the front line in the fields north of Robotine, but not by Robotine itself, because they would be too vulnerable in those positions. The Russians, however, would have by Novopokupivka, Kupyansk, and so on, so that they have better artillery support at close range. We then move on to the direction of Bakhmut, where here there has been the first reports of Wagner soldiers fighting by the front, and that is in a counterattack led by Wagner forces, incorporated with the Rosgvardia, and the Wagner forces here are not present as Wagner forces, but as a part of the Rosgvardia group. The Rosgvardia is the part of the Russian army that is not exactly a part of it, but more like a army under direct command of Vladimir Putin. And they have been fighting with the Russian army since the start of the war, and they are a part now expanded with Wagner soldiers. So according to Remilin, the first presence of Wagner commanders and units by the front line is in the direction of Klishivka, where we see them command some units in a counterattack where they've managed to gain a foothold in the north of Klishivka. So fighting continues in the direction of the village and within the village, as Wagner units have returned to the front to try and regain the lost ground that the Russian forces have lost in the absence of those Wagner forces. So in this direction, fighting continues as the Ukrainians are trying to capture the heights to the east of Klishivka, and the Russian forces are now counterattacking with the help of Wagner forces. We then move on to the Luhansk front, where here there is some fighting in the direction of Novopokupivka, and the Ukrainian forces managed to fully recapture Nadia and the forests right next to it. So the Ukrainian forces now have solidified their control here to the north and to the west of Serhivka, and in the direction of Novopokupivka, the Russian forces counterattacked in the direction of the village as they tried to capture the heights to the north of the village and tried to attack further down south through the main road here to the north of the village. We then take a look at the northern directions in the direction of Novoselivsk, where here the Ukrainian forces launched a counterattack in the direction of Novoselivsk, and have managed to re-enter the village after the Russian forces managed to capture it a while back. Now the fighting has returned to the village that doesn't exist except by name. Finally, we move into the direction of Kupyansk, where here, although there's been no territorial changes, there's a lot of news to talk about. First off, there are 4 different Russian army groupings in this direction. According to the latest report, there is some rotation going out and about in this direction. The rotation consists of the 1st Guards Tank Army, the 2nd Combined Arms Army, the 41st Combined Arms Army, and the 20th Combined Arms Army. And according to the latest reports, the Russian forces are switching some of these units out and preparing for a new set of offensive operations in this direction. And in these reports, the main bridge between East and West Kupyansk has been destroyed. The one right here has been blown up by Russian forces, and there's been further indication of fighting going on and intensifying in this direction after a Russian rotation in this direction. And something else to note, similar to how the Ukrainian forces managed to attack a Russian airfield to the northwest of Moscow, hundreds of kilometers away from the front, with some drones. This most likely was not drones that flew through this whole span of territory, because that would be very difficult to do, not because the drones are unable to, but flying that far without getting detected in a swarm of 20 or so drones, that is near impossible. So most likely it had some either infiltrated the Russian territory and moved through it and then launching from within it, or launching them from international waters, which are most likely. But now the Russian forces decided that they wanted to learn from that, and therefore there's this video here which shows a Russian Lancet drone hitting a Ukrainian plane at an airfield somewhere by the direction of Dnipro, or as well in the region itself. And we see a second drone filming the impact, showing that the cockpit of the plane was hit, but the damage of the plane itself is not clear, as the video ends there. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.